You said you are an hacker without hat. What does it mean?
A hacker is someone who immerses themselves into a system so that they become an expert in seeing what is missing and what are the shortcomings, loopholes of the system. And a white hat hacker is someone who fixes the system, who patch the system, notifying the system owner what are the problems that needs to be fixed. And a black hat hacker is someone who uses those loopholes for their own benefit without notifying the person maintaining the system. As I'm not a cybersecurity hacker, I'm a civic hacker. I hack politics, I hack law, I hack other things. But when I mean hack, I say this by seeing the same problems, same loopholes in the system. But instead of fixing it or exploiting it for my own gain, I work on a new system that doesn't suffer from the same problems. So I'm a creative hacker. Rather than working with an existing system, I try to make new systems.
How can you be an anarchist and a minister at the same time?
Well, I work with the government here, but I'm not saying that I work for the government. And there is a very important difference because all the work that I do is open software, is free software. It means that any government can use it. It just happens that the Taiwan government is the first one to try to pioneer certain programs or certain procedures. But because I give up on my copyright during this work. So if any other government want to use the system that we built, they don't have to ask for a license. They don't have to ask from our permission. They can just take our work and use it. So in this sense, I work for everybody, including the private sector and also the civil society, without specifically for the government. It's just the government pays my salary.
You are an hacker and you trust free software.
A open source software or free software means an attitude when developing software. Normally, people who write software, like writers, enjoy copyright, meaning that when other people try to copy or adapt our work, we can sue them, saying, okay, you have infringed my copyright. But in open source or free software, we believe that software is better when everybody develops them together. And when many people want to develop together, by necessity, just like in Wikipedia, they give up some part of their copyright, saying that as long as you give me credit or as long as you share it in the same way, I will agree not to sue you. And so this idea of a partial giving up of copyright is the foundation of a collaborative culture that lets thousands of people, sometimes never met each other, develop software together. And so in politics, this is what we mean by collaboration or crowdsourcing. It means that we open up the policy-making process so everybody can see how it's cooking. And people who never met us before can show up and say, hey, I want this changed because I have this very good reason and so on. And so the idea is that it enables citizens or even foreign people who look at the policy-making process to give useful contributions without having an agreement or a collaboration contract beforehand. Why can't you just meet strangers and those strangers then become, collaborators by giving useful suggestions?
Which is your influence on other ministries?
Right. At the moment, there is a central website called join.gov.tw, Join Government Taiwan. And this website, every ministry is required to make their regulations pre-announcements 60 days before it takes effect on this website. And also, all the ministries receive people's petitions so that when people have 5,000 counter signatures on this platform, the ministries are required to give a reply to the people's voice. And also, every ministry is required to publish their major construction budgets or other budgets on the same website for everybody to audit. So combining those three, the regulations and the petitions and also the budget overview, it enables in Taiwan of the 23 million people, about 5 million is already using this platform to communicate directly with the ministries. So I would say we affect pretty much all the ministries, and now we have a special regulation that says every ministry must have at least one participation officer that connects directly to people on the internet or over other media. But it's not just to media people, it's not just to legislators, people in the parliament, but with anyone who shows up with a good idea.
Why do you think we need a Ministry of Digital when we are a digital society? So ministries should all be Ministry of Digital. I mean, digital ministries.
This is a very good question. Taiwan does not have a digital ministry. So I am a digital minister without portfolio, meaning that my work connects to every ministry. As you said, this is what we call a digital transformation, meaning that every ministry must eventually become digital. So in this transformation period, it is useful to have a minister with a portfolio to connect the different digital transformation efforts in all the different ministries together. But it doesn't make sense to have a digital ministry because otherwise it would be all this ministry's business. So I work by establishing a virtual team of officers from every ministry, more than 30 of them together, instead of having a small ministry of my own.
What do you think about GovTech in Singapore?
Well, there is, of course, certain elements where we call behavioral insights or nudging or things like that. That is more about policy shaping people's behavior rather than people shaping the government's behavior. But like yin and yang, it is actually, you can't really tell one from the other, because when the government proposes something, it is natural that the citizens respond with something else. And if the government, of course, is one directional, like if you have an internet link that downloads very quickly, but you cannot upload anything, then nowadays we will think that this is broken because you cannot contribute to the internet. So my work here is not to make it entirely upload nor entirely download. It is essential that we forward something to the citizen to inspect, to audit, to deliberate, but their voices are also met with the same attention, with the same carefulness from the public service. And so this is how trust can grow between the public service and the public in general, because every side trusts the other side to treat carefully the messages sent and also give useful response and then go back and so on. So I would not say any particular direction is more important than the other. What is important is a iteration, a loop between the public service and the public.
Don't you think that in the majority of the digital societies and digitalizing government, the question is about a regulated society and not so democratic? Mm-hmm. I mean, a sort of totally opposite vision, opposite realizing of the previous vision of internet.
Our work is what we call regulation technology. We use the technology not just for disruptive innovation, but also for transforming the governance process itself, so that we can offload as many as possible of the work, repetitive work, into autonomous agents, into AI, into other efforts, so that we can catch up as quickly as the new technologies come. To make a very concrete example, we are just about to pass a FinTech Sandbox Act. And so this is the law, the legal system saying, if you come up with blockchain, with other disruptive technology, you can work with a city government to try it with maybe just 200 people at first. And once you try it for 6 months or for a year, you are required to write a report of how this technology integrates well with the society, or if it's not a good idea with the society. And during this experimentation period, our government promised not to fine or not to control this experiment. So we can have many experiments going on all over the place in Taiwan. Some will fail, and that will be like paying a tuition for everybody to learn about new technology. Some of them will be accepted by the society, and by that time, we already have a lot of data for our regulation technology, so we can make up a good new regulation for this new kind of technology. So this idea is that the technology and the law, instead of fighting against each other, we use a small-scale experiment, many small-scale experiments, so that they inform each other and can work in tandem with each other.
Digital skills, in your opinion, a government has to teach in education, or they come alone, as in your case, for example, that you learn alone?
Well, I did not learn alone. I learned it with the free software community, with the World Web community, with the Internet Engineering Task Force community. It just seems alone because we are in different continents, we're in different places on Earth, but we are together and connected by the Internet. So I think the idea of digital skills, it never grows alone. It always grows in a community. But the difference is that with digital skills, the community can be distributed. It could be all over the place on the earth, so the community stays active instead of goes to sleep at the same time, and it's like 24 hours. Every day, every time, right? So in this kind of large community, like the Wikipedia community or other communities, one finds a sense of belonging, that one can always contribute something, but without fearing that the community will disappear if you go to do some other things the other day. So it has an idea of a stableness that is not found by physical communities, because it is virtual in a sense, right? So I think all the learning of digital skills need to happen in the community. It is best if the face-to-face communication and the online communication is overlapped by a number of conferences or summits, meetups, hackathons, but it is possible to learn strictly from the virtual community.
In this vision, do you think that national borders will survive the next 5 or 10 years?
When I put on my virtual reality glasses and look at the Earth from the International Space Station, I don't see national borders. So the national borders already only exists in our own minds. Right, so for many international collaboration projects, like the Wikipedia I just mentioned, most of the participants will not think that they are working for a non-profit foundation in a certain country. It doesn't really matter, right? It is a commons shared by everybody who participate. So I would argue that in the open source software community, in the free culture community, the border is already dissolving. There is no idea of nationality anymore. There may be still borders of different languages or different cultures or diversity, and that is great, but it's not geographical. It is not based on lines and rivers on Earth.
Do you trust blockchain as the system of the future?
So blockchain technology and also distributed ledger and distributed consensus, it is a new protocol, a new way for people and machines to work with each other. And like any other protocol, like the internet, is built on the internet protocol. This is why we call this IP address, because it's the internet protocol address. The internet protocol can be used for democracy, for federating, for a lot of freedoms to protect speech. But the same protocol can also be shaped to build a great firewall, to build an intranet, to monitor, to survey everybody's every keystroke, every movement, to profile them. The protocol itself is not good or bad. It is just a new way to more efficiently, more conveniently let people communicate with each other. So it is up to us, the humans, to determine the values that we want to embed into the technology. The technology will not determine the value for us. So the same technology like blockchain or the internet protocol, it will eventually be standardized. But once they are standardized, still the use, whether it's for democracy or whether it's for authoritarianism, the ratification process in the standard will not say about which side of use. So my answer is that yes, it will be used on both sides, and further each side's agenda as well. It will be a boon, a good thing for people working on democracy, and it will also be a good thing for people who work on authoritarianism. It is a new tool that both sides can use.
In my country, many influencers from politics or journalism, also the most democratic one, are against anonymity in the web, because they think that too many people distribute fake news and spam fake news, that this is a danger for democracy. What do you think about?
Well, I think anonymity, of course, lets people express unpopular views. That is what its main use. But I mean, as a journalist, surely you know there are whistleblowers who also needs anonymity or at least pseudonymity in order to speak out when there is something injustice going on. So there are pros and cons for anonymity. But I think the main fear is that the anonymous people will waste everybody's time by having a lot of automated or spamming resources. And we see this already like 10 years or 15 years ago when the email spam issue becomes the spam wars that was in the early 2000s. Many people at that time also suggested that in order to have an email account, you really need to identify your real name, your citizen's security number, and so on, because everybody received too much junk mail from anonymous people. But in the end, this is not solved by requiring a real identity in order to own an email account. Rather, it is solved by a lot of technical and policy tools that make it very easy to see which email are spam, which email are junk mails, in order for people to report and catch the spam mailers, in order to make them very expensive to spam tens of thousands of people. So you can now still anonymously email me, and it will not be identified as spam. But if you email me anonymously and also 100,000 other people, the internet is now adapting itself so it will be caught as a spamming behavior. So I think this is the consensus of the stakeholders in the spam wars, and expect the same for the misinformation issues. It can be, of course, solved in a very heavy-handed way, like in the spam wars, but I don't think this is what the stakeholders want in the long run.
In your opinion, cyber security, I mean the contrary, cyber, could be, the point of failure of the internet?
Right. The internet was designed to survive a nuclear attack, right? It was designed so that as long as there are 3 computers in the world still operating, they can still communicate with each other, even if every other computer has been destroyed by war. It was designed to survive this scenario. So I'm sure, of course, there will be cyber attacks in the future. It is very probable that it will disable whole networks or even cities or countries, and will be traumatic. But the internet protocol is designed to be very resilient, that it is always very easier than destroying the internet. It is always very easy to rebuild the internet after such an attack, because it was built using very simple protocol, very simple methods.
Do you trust direct democracy or representative democracy?
Well, I'm an appointee, so I'm not elected. So I don't think I'm representing any particular constituent. I'm only representing myself in a sense. But for direct democracy, I think the consensus now is that if it's a very small city or a town, it's very easy to practice direct democracy because everybody knows everybody, or at least have heard of everybody. But when the scale becomes large, when population becomes tens of millions, hundreds of millions, it becomes much harder for everybody's voice to be heard in a fair fashion. So mainly it is about whether we can take the listening that it's happening between you and me at the moment and make it a scale, meaning that it makes possible for millions of people to listen to each other and understanding each other's point of view. When we solve this technological and cultural problem to thousands of people, then we can have direct democracy for thousands of people. When we solve the scalability issue for hundreds of million people, then we can have direct democracy of hundreds of million people. Before it is solved, of course, we will need some kind of representation. Now, whether the representation is done by drawing lots or by voting or by some other method, there are many different theoretical considerations and political realities. But we will always need some kind of representational system before we solve the issue of listening to millions of people.
Hiroshi Shiguro said that in the future we will have only two classes, social classes, the ones who lead because they know the systems and they know how to dialogue with machines, and a big part who will be only biological bodies for artificial intelligence. What do you think about?
Well, I mean, the same argument could be made during the Middle Ages about literacy or about how to count numbers, how to do multiplication with Roman numerals and things like that. I mean, there will be classes like that. But in Taiwan, what we believe is internet as a human right, meaning that every party in Taiwan should have broadband access. And we are one of the highest connectivity-enabled countries. And also we're using a special budget to make sure the last few percent are also equipped with high bandwidth broadcasting equipment so that they can also connect to broadband internet. Why this is important is that digital technology tend to divide people to the haves and have-nots. But if we model our school education, our basic K-12 education, so that every school children learns how to have media literacy, how to do critical thinking with the help of internet and communication technologies, then we can make sure that this class divide actually shortens instead of widens as time goes on. But this depends on the affordable access to the computation equipment and also broadband internet every point in Taiwan. And this is what we firmly believe in. So I think this is one of the things that the government in its current form has an obligation to do. If it does not intervene, then of course the society will tend to split.
How did you convince the government to have a role like yours?
Well, in Taiwan, the Constitution explicitly says that education is one of the most important priorities. And in fact, we set aside a certain percentage of the government budget just for education, and it is protected budget. You can't take those away. So the idea is just to put this internet-enabled curriculum, this idea of learning with machines, not against machines, learning with AI, not against AI, into the basic K-12 curriculum. And once it's put into the curriculum, which will take effect about a year from now, then the education budget is determined to make sure that this kind of learning must happen as a universal right everywhere in Taiwan. So this is the work that was broadly adopted by people working in the education field and is not considered as political.
How much gender is important in developing technological tools?
Well, I think in Taiwan we have the highest number of access to internet technology by women. And so I think in Taiwan we usually think technology, they don't really care about the gender. of the user designing it. But I think in our curriculum, we also emphasize the idea of diversity. So instead of one gender against the other, we emphasize that it is essential that when we're designing a service or designing a product or completing a project together in school, it is very important to have diversity. So if there's two teams in the school and one boys and one girls, then that is not so good because people will not brainstorm into so much different possibilities. So we try to mix things together, and so people see from each other's perspective and generally become much more celebrating the diversity, not just on gender, but also across generations, on racial ethnicities, and things like that.
What do you think about the fact that Trump doesn't care about net neutrality?
Well, I think net neutrality is very interesting in the sense that different people on the different part of the value chain tends to think of it either as a liberating force or a constricting force, depending on whether you work on the content layer or the transmission layer or some other layers. So I think this is a natural thing that during the digital convergence, different interested parties will take different stance on net neutrality. So I think it is very important to have an informed dialogue, but I really don't know personally about the US government's stance on this matter.
How does it work, your system of e-petitions, and how do you use artificial intelligence in politics?
So the idea of using e-petitions is that it brings awareness to the national government of the social issues or environmental issues that we may have overlooked, but the people are caring very much about. So anytime there is a e-petition that is countersigned by 5,000 people or more, every ministry will meet and make sure that the right ministry take charge of the petition issues. This has been true since 2 years ago, but 1 year ago when I joined the cabinet, there was a problem because when the petition was just for one ministry, the ministry knows very well how to answer it. It was often handled pretty well. But if one petition, for example, about misinformation on Facebook or scam bots selling fake goods on Facebook, this actually involves the Ministry of Finance, of Economy, of Transport, of National Communication, of like everybody, right? So it is very difficult for any one ministry to answer for the whole petition. So sometimes they just explains the problem and say, okay, we can do 10% of the work, but the other 90% is out of our hands. So my main work after joining the cabinet is to establish this virtual team of participation officers so that the cross-ministry issues are collectively handled by the 6 or 7 different ministries together and to like pieces in a puzzle, try to talk face-to-face with the things, the petition issue that they care about. So we also internally vote. Every ministry has a vote about what kind of cross-ministry issue they want to talk about this month. And the ones with the highest votes gets the help from the third-party facilitators, from the expert researchers, and so on. And we invite the petitioners to the national government to have a face-to-face brainstorming session for 5 hours, and then take the result of that brainstorming to the Prime Minister and other ministers with our portfolio so that we can form policy based on people's input directly and very quickly. And sometimes it's not really national, it is a local issue, such as on the remote island about a marine national park. So we all fly there to have our meeting there, because otherwise it will widen the digital divide. People who cannot travel to Taipei or people who are not so good with using the internet technologies their voice will be left out. So we go to Hengchun, we go to Penghu, we go to all those remote places when the petition is about the remote issue so that the local fishers, people and so on, they can participate personally.
Did you born hacker or you became hacker?
I think everyone is born a hacker in the sense that one has curiosity of all the system involved. Sometimes the educational school system kills the curiosity as the child is growing up. But otherwise, I think people with their natural curiosity are natural hackers.
And you have gone to US and then come back. Why did you come back? Many people go to US and stay there among their similars. But I mean, when you are so advanced with your brain in a dialogue with technology and systems, so why did you come back?
I travel to US to meet my colleagues, but about 7 months or 8 months a year, I'm actually based in Taiwan and using video conference, using robotics, using other telepresence tools to work with my counterparts in the Silicon Valley and also in London and in other European places. So this is why I think the national border doesn't really make any difference. The only thing that makes difference is the time zone difference. It's about jet lagging. It's about coordinating my sleep cycles so I can stay awake a little bit past midnight. So when people in Silicon Valley wake up, we at least have 1 hour of stand-up meeting time to work together. But it also means I don't get dragged into meetings that are unnecessary because I'm physically just not there. So I'm very used to working remotely. So I don't think that I'm returning to Taiwan. I'm mostly now just focusing on Taiwan, but my work pattern has always been the same.